Okay, and if you go and think about or if you read about what people have written about the origins of the Scandinavian model, that's not a story about Swedes coming up with a clever way of doing things. It's a story about how the Depression reorganized political power in society. Okay. Okay. I have one very subversive slide about Sweden, but perhaps I've said enough rude things, so I'll shut up.
Perhaps we can come to that in discussion. I want to thank you, James, Professor Robinson, for throwing a big pitcher of cold water on the idea that the crisis is going to result in any kind of change. And the most interesting idea I heard is that there's a lot of persistence. And indeed, when Danielle was speaking, one of my big questions is, all very well, but how do we get from here to there? And certainly in the United States, you don't see the same degree of rethinking, or indeed very little degree of rethinking about new varieties of capitalism. On the other hand, societies do change. The example you gave of Latin America, certainly in the past, Latin America was characterized by runaway inflation, very poor fiscal management, and that has changed, and Latin America has been very resilient in the face of the crisis. The United States changed in the Great Depression, and the types of capitalism that emerged after that, the degree of safety nets was greatly increased. So there's a lot of persistence, but societies and capitalisms, if you will, institutions, do indeed change, and they're most likely to change, I think, in the face of a crisis. But it isn't easy. And there's probably more rethinking going on here in Central Europe and perhaps in developing countries who look around the world and see a lot of different models from which to choose than there are in some of the larger societies that are perhaps more a slave, if you will, to their history and institutions, and where change is more difficult. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'm now going to introduce our discussant, George Mavrotis. George is the chief economist at the Global Development Network. He has 20 years of experience in working with donor agencies and governments in developing countries on a wide range of development issues. He was formerly a senior research fellow at UN WIDER, and he is the author and co-author of more than 100 publications in peer-reviewed journals, chapters and edited volumes, and books. George, over to you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to contribute to this session. I guess we all agree that the 2008 financial crisis has prompted us to take a fresh look at a wider spectrum of issues related to the globalization process. It is fair to say that we no longer find ourselves embracing globalization with the easiness and the enthusiasm of the pre-crisis era. The current second phase of globalization is different from the first phase of globalization at the end of the 19th century in many respects. Still, though, the lessons learned from the first globalization phase can help us to understand many of the current problems. However, I have to stress that the context is now dramatically different due to the unique nature of the current global financial crisis, and because of the emerging engines of growth, southern engines of growth, and the BRICS, which with a combined 43% of the world population and 21% of the world GDP cannot and should not be overlooked. Another important feature of the recent crisis is that it came from the north, contrary to what many observers would expect 2-3 years back, thus demonstrating quite vividly the iron law of the globalization process, namely, expect the unexpected to happen. At the same time, the crisis seriously challenged the Anglo-Saxon capitalist economic model and gave rise to a new debate on alternative models of capitalism ranging from the Beijing consensus to the broad variety of the European model. So we need to ask ourselves, will political pressures to push back globalization now come from the north? Is a new era of globalization going to emerge? And if so, what will its features be? These are, of course, challenging questions which require an independent, frank, and forward-looking debate to provide us with helpful and healthy reflections if not clear answers. After all, as global citizens, we need this sort of independent dialogue and reflection on possibly one of the most debatable issues of our times. And it is hoped that this conference will try to provide the right platform to discuss these issues. The three eminent speakers at this session have already raised important issues and also provided us with the right setting to start the debate on this. In my short intervention this morning, allow me to stress further some of the points already made and also add some further thoughts on the intellectually intriguing presentations by the previous speakers. Let me say a few words about globalization and conceptualizing globalization overall, I would say. Almost everyone, I guess, in this room would agree that globalization falls clearly outside the established academic disciplines. As Frederick Jameson has rightly put it a few years back, there is something daring and speculative, unprotected, in the approach of scholars and theorists to this unclassified topic, which is the intellectual property of no specific field, yet which seems to concern politics and economics in immediate ways, but just as immediately culture and sociology, not to speak, of course, of the information and the media, or ecology, or consumerism and daily life. I would not therefore attempt a definition, since many others have done this already and have done well. Globalization could well be viewed as the twofold process of the particularization of the universal and the universalization of the particular, using Roland Robertson's definition, or it could be one of the numerous other definitions already employed in the voluminous and still growing literature on globalization. I would like to stress, though, here, following Nietzsche, the inevitable recursiveness of definitions in this case. Furthermore, the role of politics is absolutely crucial. As Martin Wolf has put it in his well-known book on why globalization works, if we want a better world, we need not different economics, but better politics. And it is there, above all, that we must focus our efforts. This further strengthens the need that the overall problematic of globalization remains to be produced, since it clearly goes beyond the classic definitions in the economic sphere. Daniel Dayanu was absolutely right to say that the world is not flat. Let me add here that in Thomas Friedman's flat world, no two countries with a McDonald's operating in both of them had ever been to war with one another. Recent events, though, with Russia and Georgia in 2008 seem to cast doubt even on this view. They both have McDonald's operating in them. We need also to think beyond what I call the growth alphabet post-crisis. In other words, the preoccupation on whether the growth path after the crisis would be of U-shape, V-shape, W-shape, or L-shape. Our focus should be on poverty and on how to lift those in chronic and deep poverty from it. My own argument is that we need to worry about the really central issues in the new decade and in the aftermath of the crisis, which may well include, apart of course from the essential focus on climate change issues and the need for a new constructive thinking on sustainable development policies, the mankind-nature nexus, as Daniel Dayanu put it, and as Tony Giddens emphasized in his truly inspiring speech last evening, but also on other issues which include the food insecurity issue, poverty reduction, and a re-examination of consumerism. On the food insecurity issue and the coming new crisis in food, UNFAO reported recently that in 2009, the number of the undernourished people in the world reached 1 billion for the first time. At the same time, it's crucial to look at the possible implications of the global financial crisis, not only for the new models of capitalism that may arise from it, but also on the ways that the crisis may affect consumerism. International migration issues, we have a special session on this hot topic this afternoon, and issues related to urbanization in the developing world should also not be overlooked.